What's going on, guys? My name is Richard. Welcome back to the Stock Market Outlook video. As usual, we'll cover the price action of the major indexes, the leading stocks in the market, and we'll also check in on how my previous watchlist performed, as well as some sentiment indicators, the IBD Big Picture article, and of course the GMI Signal from wishingwellblah.com. And finally, at the end of the video, I'll kind of give you my take on what I think the trend of the market is, and based off that, you can decide how aggressive or defensive you want to be going into next week. But first things first, let's go over to the major indexes and start off with the QQQ on a weekly time frame. And overall this week, there are some yellow flags, so keep that in mind. And we'll get into everything I'm kind of looking at. And if you do enjoy my analysis, please go ahead and leave a like down below and subscribe if you're new to the channel. And let's get into it. So first things first, let's hide these drawings right here and take a look at this weekly bar. And overall on the week, it was a very strong performance from the QQQ. We were up 3.78% with an excellent weekly closing range of 89.5% and a daily closing range of 71.1% on this past Friday. So overall, from this bar, the expectation is we go sideways or higher. And going over to this weekly chart right here, you can see we are in a clear stage 2 uptrend with the price above a rising 30-week moving average. That's this red line right here. So very good things in terms of stage analysis. And going to the S&P 500, or actually let's go to the SPY, you can see it also had a very strong performance this week, up 3.27% with a weekly closing range of 98.8% and a daily closing range on this past Friday of 94.6%. And it's also above a rising 30-week moving average, so it's also in a stage 2 uptrend. And looking at the IWM, the Russell 2000 index, you can see that it also had a very strong week, up 1.62%, and a nice weekly closing range of 97.2% and a daily closing range of 94.6%. And at this time, it's not quite in a stage 2 uptrend because it is above the 30-week moving average, but that 30-week moving average is decreasing. So you want to see this flatten out and then start to move upwards, and I think that would be very bullish for the overall market. And at this time, the IWM is definitely lagging a bit, the S&P and also the NASDAQ, and you can see it just kind of broke out of this cup and handle, and the last few weeks have just been going sideways. So that's kind of the major indexes that I kind of like to look at. And moving on, we've also got, let's start with the Dow Jones, the DIA, and this looks very similar to both the IWM and also the SPY. Overall, we were up 2.65% with a nice weekly closing range of 89.3% and a daily closing range of 69.4%. And moving on, we've got the VIX, the volatility index, and overall it was up on the week, which is kind of a negative for trend followers. So keep an eye on this and see if it can start a new uptrend. And if it does, that definitely would be a reason for caution. And next up, we've got GLD, the gold index. And overall, you can see it was up on the week, up 1.3% with a weekly closing range of 83.3% and a daily closing range of 49.5%. So from this chart, the expectation is that we go sideways or higher. And next up, looking at the FFTY, you can see it didn't have the greatest week and actually underperformed the other major indexes. And overall, it was up 1.19% with a weekly closing range of only 64.9% and a daily closing range of 50%. So you can see there may be a little bit of weakness in those leading growth stocks on the IBD 50. And finally, we've got the XLF, the financials, and overall it is above the 30-week moving average, but like the IWM, it is not yet in a stage 2 uptrend because that 30-week is declining at this time. So that pretty much covers the indexes on a weekly time frame. Let's go back to this chart, go to a daily, and take a look at the QQQ day by day. And first things first, let's show these drawings right here and talk about the channel, because this is one of the yellow flags that I've been looking at. And overall, you can see we had a very strong week, up almost every single day except Thursday, but we're right at the top of this channel that's basically contained this entire move. And the last few times that we've hit the top of this channel, especially if we're above the Bollinger Band, we've been knocked sideways or back down. So definitely keep that in mind. Early next week, we could see some weakness. But overall, scrolling into this week and starting with Monday, we had a gap up and then a move down, but we did recover pretty much towards the middle of this bar. So overall, a pretty strong day. And then on Tuesday, we had a slight gap down, which I don't mind at all in a bull market. And then we finished nice and strong right near the top of the trading range for a very strong day. And that momentum carried on over into Wednesday because you can see we had a very strong day, up 2.13%. A lot of growth stocks acted very well. And overall, you can see we were right at the top of the channel line And on Thursday, we actually had a down day, down 0.31% on higher volume on the QQQ. And then we kind of consolidated into Friday, which I think is very positive. I love this action on Friday because it's kind of getting us back to the center of this channel, but it wasn't a horrible distribution day. So that's kind of what I'm looking at in terms of day-by-day analysis. And from this final bar, the expectation is we go sideways or lower because we're so near the upper channel line. And one more thing that I'm looking at, well, actually two more things, is that we are currently about 10% above the 50-day moving average, which is another potential yellow flag. And you can see before the crash, we were only actually about 8% above the 50-day, and 10% is quite extended, so keep that in mind as well. And also taking a quick look at the Webby RSI, which if you're not familiar with what it is, I'll have a link to a video popping up right now, which explains kind of the methodology around it. But overall, it is basically the low versus the 21 EMA, and we are above the kind of yellow caution sign at 4%. And this is one more reason to potentially be expecting but not predicting a slight pullback or consolidation period. So that is the QQQ on a daily time frame. And one more thing that I think is very bullish long term is the S&P 500 actually hit a new all-time closing high this past Friday, which means overall stocks are doing well. And likely if we do have a pullback or slight correction, that will be a positive and it will set up new bases for a potential another run into the end of the year. So those are the major indexes. And now let's go over to the leading stocks in the market. So I did drop QDEL off this list because it really gapped down hard on volume, but it has recovered. But right now, leave it be. It's below the 50-day. It's declining on huge volume, a huge red flag. But overall, sorting the leading stocks in the market by the weekly change, the best performers were COUP, Fastly, and also CrowdStrike this past week. And the worst performers were TDOC. You can see that's still just kind of hanging in there near that 50-day and 21 EMA, although it did close below it on this past Friday. Chegg as well is kind of breaking down. It's below the 50-day moving average. And for all these stocks that are below their 50-day, I would say let them be. There will be more opportunities to buy them if they set up another potential base. This kind of looks like the start of the left side of a cup and handle. So keep that in mind. There will be opportunities to get these leaders once they set up constructively once again. And LVGO is basically trading with TDOC, although the chart overall looks much better. And Fiverr as well is just declining below this downward trend line. This probably will be on my watch list going into next week. DDOG as well is below the 50-day, so let that be. And InfiCorp is also below that 50-day. So a lot of these, especially InfiCorp, are kind of on thin ice, and I probably will be making some more changes to this list in the near future. But going back to the top of the list, there are some very strong performers. And looking at Zoom, you can see it's right near all-time highs. You've got NVDA, which has been incredibly strong. Look at the action on this past Friday. And it's more clear on the down days what stocks are being held up and supported than on the up days. And NVIDIA really has stood out to me because even during the down periods in the market, especially the most recent kind of growth correction, it held up beautifully and never dropped more than 5%. So those are the ones that you want to be focusing on and looking for entries that meet your setup requirements. And overall, the solar stocks really stood out to me on this past Friday. You had SCDG, Solar Edge showing a green dot and short-term stochastic cross. It's in this nice gentle pullback to the 21 EMA, and the Bollinger Bands are also constricting. And EMPH as well, which I actually bought on this past Friday. It did fade a little bit, and it's right below my cost right here. But I like the shelf that it's in, and I'll probably add more if it breaks out into all-time highs. And overall, I do own TAN, which has been trending beautifully and acted well on this past Friday. And overall, looking at Tesla, you can see it did have a down day on Friday, the rare down day for Tesla. But overall, it's right near all-time highs, and it will split, I think, on the 31st, which is this Monday. So be ready for that. If you own it, be careful because it could pull back to the 21 EMA, and that would be completely normal. And I think that is a drop of about 15%. So if you're not prepared to sit through that, maybe sell a little bit into strength up here. And that way you can kind of deal with that with a smaller position size. But overall, these are probably the top four that are acting well. You've got TTD, CrowdStrike, Fastly, and also COUP. And this was on my watch list. So actually, let's transition over and talk about the stocks on this list. So first things first, we'll start with CrowdStrike, and this did break the pivot of the double bottom pattern right here, and I added to it as it broke that pivot, and so far it's acting decently well. I don't like how it's getting knocked down at these all-time highs, but hopefully it can find support before its earnings, which are very soon on the 2nd. NEO, which I bought on the break of the downward trend line right here, and then added to as it broke above this point of resistance at 1545 on the true breakout, where it was up 19%. And I sold a bit into strength. I sold half up here and then half on this day right here. I didn't like the price action. Plus you have the news of the offering coming out, and I figured I'd take my quick 35% and move that over into another stock that's setting up. COUP as well, I added to as it broke this resistance right here. And overall, it's acting very well. It didn't give that much back on this consolidation day. And hopefully we move back into all-time highs early next week. AMD as well, which I first bought on this break of the downward trend line and green dot on this day. And I added a bit last week up here. It's still in the short-term shelf, so I want to see it stay above the 21 EMA and eventually break out into new all-time highs. Peloton had a very nice move on this Friday. You can see it did break the downward trend line on Thursday, but it didn't have the prettiest action here. But I love the volume coming in right here. And as I posted about on Twitter, I like the signs of support within this consolidation, these upside reversals on volume on this one. These are just signs that it's getting supported at this level and is likely to go higher. EMPH, I already talked about. You had CalX, which broke the downward trend line and had a green dot on this day. I didn't take this one. I was focusing on other names, but overall, really nice action on this Friday on volume, and you had a short-term stochastic cross as well as a 21 EMA retake on that day. ONEM really just moved sideways along its green line, so it's kind of dead in the water at this point. PINS is acting well. It had a green dot on Thursday and had a nice closing range on this past Friday. LRN, I actually tried on this day, and I had a really good cost. But then once again, they came out with an offering, and it got knocked hard on this day, and I was stopped out, and it's now below the 50-day, below the green line. So I think definitely don't touch this at this time. It's got to form another base. ACMR as well is just declining. It's still not near this downward trend line right here, and it looks overall like it's going to go and meet up with the 50-day moving average. And finally, we've got EBS, which broke the 21 EMA, which is definitely a negative sign. And overall, I need this to set up once again and find support and move up and move towards all-time highs. So overall, we had some very strong performances this week, especially from NEO. And this setup really shows the power of buying those VCPs, especially when they coincide with a downward trendline break, as well as a breakout into new all-time highs. So that's it for my watch list. And now let's move on over to the sentiment surveys. So I post these surveys every Friday, and looking at the results, you can see we are now 45.9% bullish, which is actually a drop from the previous week, even though we moved into new all-time highs on both the S&P and also the NASDAQ. So I think this drop is bullish, but once again, this is still slightly elevated, so hopefully we can get a quick flush, and this will move down even more. And moving on, we've got the name exposure index, which is another potential yellow flag. And looking at the number, you can see it's 106.56, which is quite elevated and is another reason that we might have a quick correction sometime soon. And I do want to reiterate that these are secondary indicators, the put-call ratio, the sentiment surveys, as well as the exposure index. And the first thing you should look at is the price action of your stocks, then the leading stocks in the market, and then the indexes, and then the secondary indicators. And you shouldn't sell just because these numbers are elevated. So with that said, let's move on to the put-call ratio, which once again is a potential yellow flag. And you can see that we basically have no puts at this time. And moving on, we've got the IBD Big Picture article, and overall the headline is the S&P 500 win streak hits 7, Ollie's dives below key support while workday triggers key hold rule. So they discuss the price action of the major indexes, which we already covered, and they also talk about how WDay or workday has had strong results since the earnings pop, and also how Vertex, which is a previous leader, now seems to be stuck below that 10-week line. And they also discuss how a couple of the distribution days have gotten knocked off the tally, but we did have a stall day on this past Thursday. And they also discuss CrowdStrike, which we already talked about, as it cleared that 116.28 buy point from the double bottom. And they also talk about how Ollie's bargain outlet flashed a sell signal, which was a breakdown below that 50-day moving average. So overall, their take is we are still in a confirmed uptrend, and we now have one distribution day on the NASDAQ and one on the S&P 500. So lastly, let's check out the GMI Signal, which is still green, and overall the GMI score from this past Thursday is now 5 out of 6, and we are now in day 100 of the QQQ short-term uptrend. So taking all of this into account, I would say we are still in a confirmed uptrend, but we've definitely talked about today a couple of the yellow flags that I'm watching, including how we're at the top of that channel line, and also are flashing a couple warning signs on the Webby RSI. So take that into account in your trading next week, and best of luck, and thank you guys so much for watching. Please remember to leave a like down below and subscribe if you're new to the channel, and I'll see you guys in future videos.